So, welcome YouTube. Welcome everyone. I apologize. We've had some crazy technical bugs, JC and I, with Streamlabs. We've reset this. We were streaming. It took us a few minutes to figure out nobody was seeing us on Rumble, X, or YouTube. And then we did it again, and it happened again. And now this is our third attempt at streaming. So, apologies for the delay, but I'm back with Dr. Kuffarphobia. We're discussing the standard Islamic narrative and looking at the evidence against the arguments that Muslim Dawagandists make, and we've also got counter arguments to their counter arguments. So we're going to go through the evidence. Chapter 1 was 7th and 8th century evidence for Mecca, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot. And then, of course, chapter 2 is the life of Muhammad. So we're going to finish up chapter 1 and head into chapter 2. And I believe we are live. And Yeoman, test 6. Yes, that was the correct answer. Thank you very much. Hello, HH. And I apologize again for the long delay. But we had a crazy bug. So, yes, welcome back, JC. Good to see you.
Oh, welcome back. I'm glad the third time is a charm, as they say. That was crazy.
That was a weird one, yeah. Yeah, but here we are. So yeah, it's your show, man. So
all right, man. So I shared the screen, and we're gonna pick up. I think you said number 9, so I'm gonna have to switch screens.
Yeah, it's live. I'm showing it. Okay. I'm showing it on screen now.
All right, so we left off, and actually, the first chapter was on the lack of 7th and 8th century. So we went over the 15th arguments that you could make as somebody doing the polemics. We went over the 15 arguments that the Muslims could make, and then we left off on the 15 refutations to those arguments. And we're picking up on 9. I'm not sure if we were on 9 or 11, but so number 9 would be Jacob of Edessa, 692.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the refutation would be Jacob's mention of Arabs facing Mecca when praying is a reference to the changing political and religious allegiance, but it does not confirm the existence of an Islamic religion or the Quran. And you can find that in Shoemaker's The Death of a Prophet. I would highly recommend getting his books, although I wasn't too thrilled with his last book. Number 10, Theophilus of Edessa. Again, he's writing about the Arab rule. Now, notice one thing that we've been seeing throughout the first episode. It always mentions like Arabs. It doesn't say Muslims.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
So it says the mention of the Arab rule, but are silent on Muhammad's role. So also when Muhammad has been mentioned in the early 7th century, you wouldn't see Muhammad. You would see the 4 consonants, M, H, M, D, which is Mahmed, or praised one, the chosen one, which is a reference made to Jesus Christ. So what these scholars and historians have kind of concluded is that Muhammad was a later redaction or fabrication. So they had to come up with a prophet. If you're going to have a religion, you got to have a prophet. And of course, if you have a prophet, you got to have a book, and then you got to have a holy place. And this all ties into Islam is basically Mecca, Muhammad, and the Quran. If any one of those legs on the 3-legged stool fall, then you've kind of pretty much destroyed the whole notion of the Islamic standard narrative.
I agree that Islam, given all of the issues we have with it, it is a stool, certainly.
Yeah. All right, so the refutation. So his writings mention Arab rule, but are silent on Muhammad's role as a religious leader or the Quran. His description lacks theological references that would confirm the rise of Islam as a distinct faith. And again, this is what the scholars from Germany have concluded, is that Islam as a religion, separate of any heresies, did not come into play until the end of the 8th, 9th century. You can find it in Robert Hoyland. Yes.
No, interesting comment. So Muhammad is mentioned in the Quran 4 times, a grand total of 4 times. Jesus is mentioned at least 78 times, maybe 85 times, 84 times. So you've got the book is about this man who is the prophet who is spreading the message in the book, and he's barely mentioned in his own book, right?
Right.
And then Mecca is mentioned a grand total of one time,
Mm-hmm.
without any context, with no idea that Mecca is critically important to this whole enterprise with this man Muhammad. And then, of course, you look at the Bible. Now, imagine Jesus was only mentioned 4 times in the New Testament. Would you think that was about him, that he had any relevance, any importance?
I mean, I would find that highly suspicious that the main character is only being mentioned 4 times.
Right.
But here's
And then Mecca is once.
yeah.
Jerusalem is. Guess how often Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible?
Oh, I'm pretty sure more than it's mentioned in the Quran, which is zero.
So exactly, Mecca is 0 times in the Quran. The name Yahweh is 0 times in the Quran. Mecca is mentioned like one whole time, and then maybe that's why Muslims have this little finger thing. Mecca one. We have one mention, thank God, and Jerusalem is mentioned over 800 times in the Bible.
And the funny
From
thing is, you're talking about when we talk about Jerusalem, you're talking about a holy site that was the central point to not just Judaism, but also to Christianity. Now, if Islam is said to be Abrahamic, and it's supposed to come and correct, the mistakes that the Jews and the Christians made, there is not a single reference to this place, right? And
right,
Mecca, which is supposed to be, I mean, I would say Mecca would be the equivalent of Jerusalem to the Muslims. And yet, like you said, it's only mentioned 1 time. And we really don't know where this place is at, or, what
yeah,
exactly it's referencing to. And then the main guy, the prophet, right? The first time that this whole book, aka the Quran, mentions Muhammad, or what Muslims say it's Muhammad because it's still up for debate, is in the 89th chapter. So you have 88
89.
chapters of the book that never mentions this guy, but yet the whole book was given to him or revealed to him, and he's not mentioned until
Well,
the end of,
chapter 89.
yeah, 89 out of
Maybe Allah forgot,
114.
you know.
You know,
And also, additionally, Zion, the term Zion is used synonymously with Jerusalem, so it appears another 154 times. That
yeah.
leaves us with 960 mentions of Jerusalem in the Bible. And there are, how many mentions of Mecca are in the Bible?
Mecca.
Yeah,
Well, that depends. If you're a Muslim, they'll say that the Valley of Baca is Mecca. Zero.
0. Yeah, so these numbers don't add up. This does not add up at all.
Well, that also shows that there was no city, of Mecca. Now, Mecca could have been like maybe a little settlement, as Shoemaker says in his latest book, of maybe 500 people, right? But as
Mhm.
a city, as portrayed by Muslims, as portrayed by the Quran, the Sirah, the Hadith, it is the mother of all cities or villages, right? So it's very important, right? Supposedly, it has existed from the time of Adam. Uh, Abraham and Ishmael went there. Ishmael actually lived in Mecca with a few of his wives, um, but we don't have any references.
You know, I mean, I think to accurately describe Mecca, we can say it is a place where the men are men and the sheep are scared.
Yeah.
That was a
So
joke, by the
yeah.
way.
So
Right, moving on.
yeah. So the place that the most important man in Islam was supposed to have been born in, we really don't have any evidence for it. So number 11 is the Doctrinal Jacobi, which some Muslims will try to say, oh look, it's talking about Muhammad. So Doctrinal Jacobi, which is said to date from 634. Now that date's very important. Doctrinal Jacobi describes a false prophet among, again, the Arabs, but does not identify him as Muhammad. It also predates the formation of a clear Islamic religious identity. So this text cannot be used as evidence for early Islam. The problem is that if this is truly from 634, Well, there's a problem because according to Muslims, Muhammad died in 632.
Hmm.
Doctrinal Jacobi actually says that this prophet comes with a flaming sword proclaiming the advent of Christ. And this is in Gaza. Well, Muhammad never left his little, neck of the woods.
He had a flying donkey, man.
Yeah, and now if he really died in 632, now there's a problem. I found three hadiths in Sahih Muslim, the second most trustworthy collection outside of Sahih Bukhari, where we're always told the chains of Isnad, which is something that I've also put together on something else. Chains of Isnad, the chain of transmission, science of transmission. Well, I found three hadiths pretty much in the same page. One says Muhammad died at 60. One says he died at 63. And then another one says he died at 65. Now, how can you trust anything where they don't even know when the man died? Now, if he did die in 635, okay, then this could have been referring to Muhammad. But again, Muhammad never left the area, right? So this proves that even if there was a Muhammad, now I'm not saying that 100% there wasn't a man named Muhammad, right? I can't believe that Muhammad was the first Muhammad. And this is what Jay Smith says. If there was a Muhammad, this Muhammad came from up north, the Arabia Petraea. So therefore, it would not be the Muhammad that supposedly came from Mecca, who then migrated to Medina and spent his last 10 years before conquering Mecca. So it could be a Muhammad, but it surely would not be the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative. And
Right.
as far as being a Muslim, I don't think he would have been a Muslim.
Yeah, if I can show something on that point, again,
Yeah,
it's something I've shown many times before to my audience, and this is just the audience, just a reminder. This is a Muslim book written by Muslim scholars, and it is Hola Philip, hey from Camino Mozarab, man, lucky you. So, yeah, what is commonly spread but not proven from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and famous but unauthentic, in other words, false stories from the seerah of Prophet Muhammad. Quick look at Khadija. Reports in his youth, he's married to Khadija. And it says that the report of her marriage, right, while her age was 40, is from the weakest of hadith narrations. In fact, it is matruk. Matruk means it states it down here. Let's just actually have a look. Matruk means it is rejected in hadith. These are false hadith. These are rejected because they are so weak. Rather, it is said by Imam Ibn Kathir that she was 35 or 28 or 25. So you've got a range of 10 years there. And in fact, a range of 15 years.
So we don't need, these guys don't even know. It's like, but that's funny because even Allah sometimes in his book says, maybe it was this or that. Now we're talking about God, and God doesn't know, which one is it? Is it this or that? Yeah. But I have heard about this, that she wasn't, she wasn't the cougar that we were led to believe.
Yeah. But this also then throws one of the reasons is that you can't have a 40-year-old having 6 children in the desert in the 7th century. So she had to be younger. But that said, what does this do to the chronology? You've got a 15-year range here. What does that do to the chronology? How does that throw everything else off? And the fact that these reports are not credible in any way, yet Muslims tell us it's 100% authentic.
Yeah, because what did they say? The original, that she was 45, right?
40, apparently.
Well,
Well, could be, yeah, 45. He was 25, she was 40, and don't forget, 40 is like a magic number. Alibaba and the 40 thieves. It's a
right.
magic number.
At 40, you're right. At 40, having 6 kids, ooh. 40 is really rough, and that's what today's, medical technologies. So could you imagine back in the, if all of this is really, well, we know it's not true, but a 40-year-old woman, having 6 kids, that means, let's give it about a year and a half. That means she would have had her last kids somewhere in her close to 60. Yeah, I'm not
No,
buying that
that's not going
story.
to fly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
28 maybe, but yeah, 40 and Muhammad is 25, so the 15-year. Yeah, I'm just not getting. Okay, so the rock inscriptions in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, here's a problem that I have when people just say the Arabian Peninsula, because the Arabian Peninsula was actually really broken down into three Arabias. You had the northern Arabia, which was called Arabia Petraea, which included Jordan, Palestine, Israel, Syria. You had the Arabia Deserta, which would be most of what today is Saudi Arabia. And then on the very southern part, it would be Arabia Felix, which today we find Yemen and Oman. So I have a big problem when they just say Arabia, because Muslims are fixated on the word. Anytime they see,
Mm,
let's say, Arabia in the Bible, I mean,
right.
they just start jumping up and down, but they don't know that when the Bible is referring to Arabia, it's referring to Arabia Petraea, because that whole area is closer to Jerusalem, where the Israelites would be, than, let's say, Mecca,
Yeah.
Medina, or Yemen. So,
Can I add something to what you said? Because
yeah, sure.
I do believe that scholars look. I think we all have our frustration with scholars. That's why we're doing what we're doing, right? Because the scholars have been neglecting their duty, right? But you mentioned there are the three Arabias, and technically there were four. There were four Arabias.
Ah, okay.
Arabia Heresium Ferax, Arabia, the bearer of heresies, a phrase attributed to Theodoret of Syr in the 5th century. So it reflects the perception of Arabia during early Christian history as a region associated with heretical Christian sects and beliefs. So this is really. Let me just find Ferax, and I had this up yesterday as well. Let me bring this up. And there's a fascinating paper I've covered a few times. So, schismatic Christianity's potential influence on Muhammad and the Quran. So, this is a fascinating paper which I should cover. And so, Arabia had a reputation for being the mother of heresies in the region.
Well, true. Now, is it possible that this Arabia Ferox is referring to Arabia Petraea, which would have
No,
had all
this
the.
would be Najran in the south.
Okay,
Well, look, there were heresies all over. So
right.
there were heresies all over. You had Alexandria in Egypt, which was one of the major centers. You had Haran across the border, just off Syria into Turkey, and then you had Najran, which is also a Christian pilgrimage center, just south of southern part of Saudi, just across the Omani border right now. But of course, there was heresy everywhere. But these were the major concentrations, and that whole southern portion was said to be Christian heresy. So
Right.
this is just something to note. Scholars have been neglecting this, and I want to make people aware of this.
Huh. So that would be, yeah, that'll be interesting, because I was only aware of the major three. Now, this is in the 5th century, correct? So I believe the three Arabias came before
Yeah.
the 5th century
Yeah.
in
On that
ancient
point,
times.
there's something I've noticed. For instance, there was a push by scholars to claim that there was no Christianity in Arabia. Well, because they wanted to believe that Islam sprung out of nothing, right? That it was a purely fresh, new revelation, untainted by, not a copy, not a carbon copy of Judaism and Christianity, right? So there was the claim that there was no Christianity. This is now being proven false. The archaeology is proving this false. The evidence now is proving this claim to be false. Christianity was everywhere. However, the pendulum is now swung to the other side, where everyone's claiming there was zero paganism, nothing whatsoever, not even microscopic amounts. And that's not true either. But I'll cover that another time. So, yeah, back to you, man.
Yeah. Now, are you saying that there's evidence of Christianity and Judaism in the Mecca, in what is today Mecca in Medina, or in the whole of the area? Because I
Around
think
the
if you're
area, I'm
about to
not
say,
necessarily saying Mecca and Medina, but okay, I'll give you one example. Let me just bring this up. So look, everything to be taken with a grain of salt. I have not yet thoroughly examined this. I came across this today. I pay for a subscription to the Biblical Archaeology Society.
Okay.
And this is because archaeology, the rocks, I mean, the rocks say what the rocks say, right? And
Right.
they speak of Jews in pre-Islamic Arabia. And there was a Jewish diaspora in ancient North Arabia, and that's Arabia Petraea.
Right.
But this is also northern Arabia. So you're looking at this above Mecca, above Medina, in Al Ula. So you're looking but basically in Saudi Arabia today, the northern half of Saudi Arabia, there was supposed to be a Jewish diaspora, and there's new archaeology being found of Jews, at least in those regions.
Right.
So this is something I plan to be going through because I'm doing some work with Odon, and this claim that there was no paganism. That's also, I believe, that's an exaggeration now. It's to try and hide the fact that there was some degree of paganism, and I think we need to discuss that. I've got some evidence on that I'd like to bring up. And
Okay.
Richard Quimby says, I enjoy your calm understanding of Islam. I've been trying to learn as much as possible since 2017 when I was in Mosul, Iraq, 2 times serving at a field hospital very close to the front line. I was in Mosul in 2017 myself, briefly, a couple of times, doing some work. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it. Yeah, back to you, man. Um,
All right. So okay. So the rocks. Right. Well, I think that was. I did send a message to Professor Ahmed El Jalad asking him what exactly was he trying to say, because that's been his work, is the inscriptions in
mhm,
the Arabia area. And he's the one that was saying from the interview or the show that he did with Dr. Gabriel C. Reynolds. And they were
mhm.
talking about the inscriptions. And he had mentioned that, clearly there's tons and tons of inscriptions showing, paganism, idol worshiping in the third, fourth, and fifth century. And then he said by the sixth century, there's no evidence of, there's evidence of monotheistic practices. He wasn't sure, if it was, Christian or or from Judaism. But I don't know if he was just referring to the area around Mecca and Medina, because I do know the shoemaker in his latest book also mentions that there is no archaeological or historical evidence for any tribe of Jews or Christians in the Mecca Medina area. So, I mean, I don't know. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see that. So that
Yeah,
was.
go on.
I was going to say that you can the inscriptions. Now, have you read Dan Gibson, his book "Let the Rock Speak"?
It's been a while since I've looked at Dan Gibson. I
Okay.
really enjoyed his work. I think his work with his concept of Petra is not wrong, but I believe it overstates the position of Petra, or maybe Petra was important at one time. Or he exaggerates it slightly, or he mistakes its importance. It's relevant to this narrative, but yeah. Although there are other scholars, other guys who kind of threw Dan Gibson out baby and bathwater plus the bath.
Oh yeah, yeah. But he has a new book that he gives away for free. That's called "Let the Rock Speak," and I haven't
All
had a
right.
chance to read it yet. But yeah, there was some controversy about the whole Petra. Now, Petra or Sela was a kind of like a holy site, because you had
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
where the Edomites lived, right? The Edomite kingdom. Then you had the Nabateans. So, and this kind of looked like some kind of religious, city or site. Um, and I think he was saying it because in his research for the Qiblas, he claims that the Qiblas were, for at least 100 years, all the mosques were pointing to Petra. But I did see something here that we went over that talked about, you know, um, mosques facing Mecca, and I don't know about that, because that would go against uh, his work. But guys, don't take everything here as 100% gospel, because this is my effort with having a debate with Chat GPT and asking him to formulate arguments and sources so that I could do an argument or a debate with my
Yeah.
opponents, which would be Muslims. So you do have to be careful with all these AIs, because they do make mistakes, and trust me, I've found lots of mistakes
Yeah.
being made by chat.
Well, I think it's fair we can say there are questions
Yeah.
that need to be asked, and that certain assertions cannot be true, and thus the standard narrative needs to be questioned, and it cannot be accepted at face value. I think that that's
Right.
not a controversial thing to say.
Yeah. And that should be done regardless of the topic, right? If you're doing some research, don't just simply accept whatever you're given. Do your own research, right? I make mistakes, so and I when I debate Muslims, I'll tell them, listen, I don't know everything. If you can show me something, not just tell me, because Muslims are very good at telling you, oh yeah, we got this, we got this, we got that, and I'll
Hmm.
say, can you show it to me? I never get any evidence. It's always talk with no evidence. But if somebody can show me the evidence and it's irrefutable, I don't have a counter for it, then guess what? I have learned something, right? I won't be making that mistake again. Um, but so
Hmm.
far, that hasn't been the case. I will present my evidence, whether it's from the Quran or uh, in the other sources. Hey,
Yeah.
they are more than willing to go ahead and refute, the scholars, because this is not my actual work. I'm just putting
Yeah.
together all it is from scholars, so that people don't have to go, spending hours and weeks, trying to find it. And if they don't know the topic, they might have some information that's wrong.
Right.
So we're on 13 pagan, Jewish, and Christian responses.
Let me get back
So,
to you. Yeah.
yeah. So one of the problems is that we don't have hardly anything from Jewish or Christian responses from the 7th century. Which again, the 7th century is very important because these people that are described as Arabs or Ishmaelites or Hagarites or Saracens or Mohawkites, something like that, uh,
Muhaggadites.
they started conquering everything. I mean, they just went on I would say, a shopping spree, but not that kind of shopping spree that you want to go on to. So they were invading, the Persian Empire, the Byzantium Empire, the Romans. I mean, they spread out to North Africa, and then they went to Spain, all within like 100 years to 150 years. And the sources from the 7th and the early 8th century, somehow the important key or keys are missing, right? Meaning the religion of Islam is never, we're never told that these people have a religion called Islam, which again,
Hmm.
very suspicious. We're never told that these people have a holy book called the Quran. They're never called Muslims. Now, Muslims will tell you, oh, that's because people were using derogatory names, which I'm not
Hmm.
buying that, right? So like I was saying, in the 7th centuries, Jewish and Christians, they describe the Arab conquest, but they're lacking any significant references to Islamic religious practice or texts, right? These sources reflect more of a political nature than a religious one. So you can see the religion came much later.
Right.
It didn't start off because it should have been solidified by 632, meaning Islam should have existed by the end of 632, right? And even the Quran says in chapter 5, today I have perfected your religion, Islam. The Quran was already supposedly put together, not in a book form, by Muhammad in 632. And these people are being referred to Muslim according to the Quran. And yet we don't see any of that. Even into the 8th century, when you read the stuff from John of Damascus, he does not refer to any of that stuff. And this is from Patricia Crone, Hagarism, the making of the Islamic world. I think she was probably one of the forefront scholars who started bucking the system. She
Hmm.
wasn't very liked, that, especially the Make and Trade Route book. All right, then Greek and Latin references to the Saracens. Now, in a particular area, especially in the North Arabia, Arabia Petraea, you had the Romans who spoke Greek and Latin. Um, we see that they used the term Saracens, not Muslims. So that term was used to describe the Arabs. It says generically and does not indicate a specific religious identity tied to Islam. These sources, they fail to provide a clear theological connection to either the Quran or Muhammad. And this is from Lawrence Conrad, The History of Early Islamic World. And finally, the last one, the Quranic references in papyrus documents, late 7th century. Papyrus fragments with Quranic verses are just that. They're fragments with verses. It does not indicate that Islam or the Quran actually existed. Now, what it does show when you put all the pieces together is that it was an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It took years, actually about 200 years, to come to the conclusion of what today we consider to be Islam and the Quran. It says these documents lack the full structure of the Quran, suggesting that they may be later developments.
Now that is interesting. This 200 years, please tell me what you know about that, this 200-year claim.
Well, that was based on the second volume done by the 5 German scholars, mainly Karl-Heinz Oeglich. Yeah.
Oleg, Puin, and so on.
From The Hidden Origins, which is the first volume. Now, it's kind of weird because it doesn't say volume 1, volume 2, but they consider that was the conclusion that they came to. And the conclusion that they came to was that, one, Islam originally started as a sect of Christianity, a heretical sect. Mm-hmm. So they say that the Umayyads, and also they also included the early Abbasid caliphs were heretical Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Then they said that Islam, as a separate religion, disassociating from any so-called, Christian heresies, didn't come into play until the end of the 8th and 9th century. Now, I know some people think of 8th, 9th century as 800 and 900 AD, but it's actually, so 8th century would be from
700s, 800s.
Yeah. Right. So it's basically the 7th and 800s. And then the final conclusion is they say that the Quran was a historical development of at least 200 years.
Okay. Now, interestingly, a couple of things, if I can show them.
Yeah, sure.
This is what you're bringing up is very interesting. Now, here's the thing. There are certain scholars, especially let's call them YouTube scholars for now. I mean, some of them have PhDs and they're legitimate scholars, not like you and me, right? However, J.J. Walter wrote this book here, Le Grand Révèle par la théorie des codes, whatever. My bad French. But what he did was he applied mathematical code theory to the Quran. Now, certain scholars don't like it because it's a radical new approach. However, it's not that radical in that this theory is very similar to the AI software that analyzes text to look for plagiarism. They use this in academia. They use the same code to see if a text has been written by an AI and not by a human, because every writer has a certain subconscious flow, a certain grammar, style, timing, rhythm, diction, and so on. Now, from the group that works around Inara and stuff, they say this work presents a new methodological approach for Quran research, which has yielded valuable results for other classical texts and appears suitable in principle for analyzing layers of text genesis, right? So in other words, it should be suitable. It's been used elsewhere. I think they just don't like his conclusions. He's come to the same conclusions using mathematics to come to that conclusion, mathematical statistical calculation. So he states, the Quran was not the work of a single author, but a compilation by multiple authors over a period exceeding 2 centuries. So he says the environment, so the thesis is the result of an analysis of the Quran using mathematical code theory and information on Islam and its environment during the first 2 centuries after Muhammad. This includes Greek, Jewish, Christian legends present in the region, the theology of local sects, apocryphal acts, Christian antiphonies. We've covered this before. Some of these sources appeared 5 centuries before Islam. All were present in this region by the time Islam was born. So this 200-year number has been confirmed utilizing this technology. Then a different point. Now, you just mentioned something, and I just thought this would be interesting for the audience. It's something I'm looking to develop, and I got this idea from someone who made the comment in the chat, and I get a lot of these comments which are added on the videos by viewers like yourselves, that add things that are gold, and these things yield really interesting results when I do the research, given your input. So this is with reference to Inara and Robert Kerr. And this guy writes, the interpretation of the Umayyads as Christians is not supported by historical evidence. There are no sources that connect the Umayyads with any distinctively Christian practices like churches, liturgy, the episcopacy, or sacraments. While some heretical groups maintained certain Christian features, they diverged in their Christological views. The Arabs during this period appeared to lack understanding of fundamental Christian rites like the Eucharist, which has always been central to Christianity. Jacob of Edessa expressed concerns over Arabs mocking Christian mysteries, highlighting their unfamiliarity with these essential elements of the faith, and they do so today. And the Umayyads ruled over a very diverse population that included a significant number of Christians who were allowed to practice their religion but were subject to the jizya, which Muslims did not have to pay, and prominent Christians did hold important positions in the administration and the court. So there was a religious accommodation. Just your thoughts on that before I hand over to you again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of getting the feeling that he's stuck on the standard Islamic narrative, because we have the coins from the early Umayyad caliphs, the so-called leaders. And my understanding is, I haven't been able to find conclusive evidence, is that these people, whoever they were, the Umayyads, right,
Mm-hmm.
that they used to pay tribute to the Romans, to the Emperor Justine. And you can see the coins that they used. You can see it's the same coin that Justine had minted. It's got him and his two
Justinian.
sons.
Yeah.
They have the crosses. We see that. It's not until like around Abdul Malik, which is almost at the end of the 7th century, is when we start seeing the anti-Trinitarian attack,
Yeah.
right?
Although I just want to note that, I mean, having a single factor proof, it's like the Jews did it, right?
Yeah.
And no one else is responsible for anything. I mean, this is a very important point here. What were the distinctively Christian practices of these Umayyads that made them Christians? Well, apparently nothing
Mm-hmm.
but coins. See, now the coins are very important, and they give us certain evidence, but to go but coins, therefore we can ignore all other evidence, I think that would be naive and dishonest.
Right. We also have the point that, let's say they weren't Christians, they weren't Muslim, they weren't Muslim, and they didn't have a religion, and there was no holy book during during that period of time. Because again, we do not have any evidence that says otherwise, right? Everybody that's writing about these people,
Yeah.
these Arabs,
They were proto-Muslims of some type,
right?
but yeah, Muslim was a late identity that they adopted. In fact, the term Muslim comes out of an Umayyad, as a small Umayyad. There was a prince or something. A small group of Umayyads called themselves Muslims because the bulk of what we call Muslims today were calling themselves the believers, and this group, to give them a little bit of distinction, called themselves Muslims. And it should be noted that the term Mu is a prefix. Muslims. It's actually two words, right?
Yeah.
And later on, the Abbasids adopted this term Muslims as the name for the whole group. So there's a bit of history there as well that I've covered in monotheism. Yeah.
I think Dr. J. Smith said that the first reference to the term Muslim, I think he said it was in 741, which would be just about at the end of the
Umayyad.
empire, because
Yeah.
they were overthrown by the Abbasids in 750 AD. So it's kind of strange, because, like I said, the whole sect of Christianity, which they didn't exactly mention the sect, is that's what the German scholars are saying in their books. And we're not talking about books written 20, 30 years ago. We're talking about books that are written in the last 10 years. So for them to come to this conclusion, I'm not sure if he's familiar with their works or vice versa. So I mean, it could be something in between, but we definitely know that these guys did not have a faith called Islam. They didn't have a holy book called the Quran. Now, they might have had parts of it, because John of Damascus
Chapters.
says they had 4 books, right? So he's not denying that they don't have something.
Mm.
It's just not the Quran that we're told, and that's in
Right.
the late well, in the early to mid 8th century, roughly over 100 years after, Muhammad supposedly, passed away. So Islam should have been definitely 100% solidified by the time of John of Damascus. And yet he makes no references. I think he does mention a reference to Muhammad, but no Quran, no Islam, and these people are not called, Muslims. So the papyrus, again, these documents, they lack the structure of the Quran. Again, saying that it's a later development, and I think that's what Walter was saying, and I think that's also what the German scholars are saying, that this was not done because the standard Islamic narrative tells us that the Quran came to one man, right, who then had it written down. But they're saying no, it wasn't. It wasn't to one man over a 22-year period. This was, you can call it an evolution, a development that took, like I said, at least 200. He says maybe more. So yeah, it says here these refutations emphasize the fragmentary and often ambiguous nature of the evidence presented for the early Islamic history, challenging the counter arguments and focusing on the absence of clear, unambiguous primary sources from the 7th century. So if we were to take this to court, right, you'd have to show, evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, or at least if it's a civil court, preponderance of evidence, right? Criminal and civil slightly different because you're dealing with somebody's life and liberties. So, it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. When it comes to criminal, it's whoever has the most evidence wins the case. So that pretty much concludes the information on the 7th and 8th century. There's a lot more, but this is all that I put together on this particular 72-page book.
Now that is fascinating. I mean, honestly, it is fascinating information. There's so much that you can do with this. You can branch off in so many directions, and these are highlights. Imagine if you had to dig into each strand.
Oh yeah. CQ brought something very interesting. He says early Islamic coins have imprints of Zoroastrians, crescent, and wings. I thought the coins were a crescent moon, but it turns out when you look at the coin and you look at the 4 quadrants, it's not a crescent. It's not a crescent
I think
moon.
it could be both, because that motif was common since 1000 BC or earlier, and in some cases it's the sun disk, in some cases it's a moon disk, well, sun disk, and in some cases it's fire. It could just be repurposing.
Yeah, I mean, I was told that it could also be like a bowl, with fire. But I do know that in one of the coins, if you flip it over on the back, it has a fire altar.
Yeah, so the fire altar, I think, is what is the fire, and then the crescent and the star, or the crescent and the moon, that is crescent and moon, not fire in a bowl.
And this would make sense because where were the Zoroastrians? They were up in Arabia Petraea.
Yep.
And the Umayyads ruled from Damascus, not Mecca, not Medina, which would be weird. If Muhammad and Islam came from Mecca and Medina, why did these people somehow move, 1,000 miles north and rule from there? Why not rule from Mecca and Medina? Again, something that just
because they were searching for the lost city of Mecca, but they hadn't found it yet.
They were looking for the fountain of youth, and they found it there. And even the Abbasids, the early Abbasid rulers, they built the city of Baghdad, and they ruled from up there. It wasn't until much later that they, made Mecca, or what is Mecca today, like the holy city. And I would call Medina like the political capital. But yeah, it's all these little things that when you start questioning, why are these guys in Damascus and now Mecca and Medina? Why is it for 100+ years? It's almost like nobody knew what the word Islam was, or the religion Islam, or a holy book called the Quran, which again, none of this makes any type of sense. All right, so part 2 is challenging the life of Muhammad, a historical gap. So the standard Islamic narrative, or sin, is based on, okay, you have Muhammad as the prophet, right? So sin says or claims that Muhammad's prophethood was well documented and wildly accepted by his contemporaries. Right. Then you have the Macon revelations. This basically says that for 12 years, from 610 to 622, is revelation being revealed to Muhammad, and then he migrated or did the hijrah to Medina. But some of the scholars are saying that 622 is a significant year, but not because these people migrated to, or Muhammad, migrated, fled, or whatever you want to call it, to Medina, but it was an important day dealing with the Romans and the Persians. I think in 622 is when the Romans won a major battle. So they're kind of doubting the whole story of the whole hijrah. Muhammad's after 12 years and only 150 followers or less. Because again, their sources are not very conclusive. It's always, some scholars will say it was 70, some scholars will say it's 100, but it was no more than 150 after 12 years. So I'd say the man had a very poor track record.
Yeah.
If that's all you can muster.
Maybe they wanted an obscure person. Maybe they wanted an obscure prophet that no one really knew so that they could pin all the stuff on him and no one could disagree.
Yeah.
That's why they chose Mecca. It's a clean slate, fresh start. No.
I mean, it could be. Okay, then of course the most famous, the night journey, the Isra and in the Miraj, which is funny because who has the same basically the same story? These Zoroastrians. What's his name? Zoroaster, the prophet, supposedly also took a journey to the seven heavens on a mystical beast. Kind of weird, huh? So this is when supposedly Muhammad, flew there. Now, from the Quran, that never happened. We don't know. There's chapter 17, verse 1, just says that Allah took his servant from the nearest mosque to the furthest mosque. We don't have a clue where these mosques are at. We don't have a clue who the servant is, but it's all based on much, much, much later stories, sources. Early Muslim community. They claim that a well-organized Muslim community existed in Mecca and Medina during Muhammad's lifetime. Again, now Medina was well established. It was called Yathrib. Shoemaker says at best it would have had 1,000, people living there, with about 300 and something being, adult males. Mecca, we have 0 for Mecca existing in the 7th or prior.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have, of course, you got to have the book, the compilation of the Quran. According to the story, like I said, Muhammad from 610, from the time he got squeezed in the cave to about 632, that's when the whole Quran came down. Now, it wasn't compiled. I do disagree with that, but that also depends on how you define compiled. Yes, it was written down at the time of Muhammad, supposedly, because as he got revelation, it was written down. So it should have been written down in multiple materials, animal skins, bones, rocks, leaves. But as a book, no, that came later. The battle, father.
Sorry, if I can show this for a moment. This is the Ardaviraf. So you have the Ardaviras Namag. So Zoroastrianism has a winged horse-like creature with a human head. So Ardaviraf made a night journey to heaven under the guidance of the angel Sarosh. And this is exactly what Muhammad did with the angel Jibrish.
Right.
So it's exactly the same story. It's essentially the same story. Yeah. So it's a copy of a well-known.
And you can tell when you read the Quran, right? You can tell we know where all these things that are in the Quran came from. What's his name? I think it's William Tinsdale has a book that shows the sources of the Quran. There's a lot of things from the legends of the Jews, a lot of the apocryphal / Gnostic so-called, Gospels. You have the Talmud is in the Quran. You have the Christian story legend of the seven sleepers of Ephesus. But of course, we don't know how many are in the cave. We don't even know why or so forth. But there is a dog in there, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see that, and these are stories. These are not revelations from God, right? Because everything in the Quran is supposed to be not man-made, but we know that just about everything in the Quran is from man-made sources. So what's in there? So these battles, Battle of Badr, Uhud, and Khaybar, these battles are cited as evidence of Muhammad's leadership in the early Muslim community's struggle and triumphs. I, I doubt that. Hadith literature, which comes about 200 plus years, that's when the authors are from, not necessarily that we have copies from that time period. So we're talking about 9th to 10th century. So the Hadiths is supposed to be a collection of Muhammad's sayings, his deeds, his actions, and so forth. That's supposed to be evidence of Muhammad's life, right? Historical confirmation. This argument suggests that early Islamic texts confirm Muhammad's historical existence and actions. Well, easier said than proven. The role of the
Mhm.
Sahaba, or his companions, emphasizes the role of Muhammad's companions in preserving and spreading his teaching. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah
Hudabiya.
Hudaybiyah presented evidence of Muhammad's diplomatic skills and consolidation of the Muslim influence. I don't think that treaty actually is from that time period. Historical accounts from early Muslim historians. Yeah, so you have early Muslim historians. But what does early mean? 9th, 10th, 11th century. So you have Islamic historians like Ibn Ishaq, who is said to have written the first biography of Muhammad. Unfortunately, nobody has a copy of his, which was then later written by Ibn Hisham, which, that's in the
Yeah,
833.
and it's based on traditions from four other authors, and those aren't available either.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have Al-Tabari, probably the most respected historian. And he also has his tafsir collection. So,
Actually, let me show everyone this just briefly. So Tabari is a historian, apparently the cousin of Muhammad. So you can see here, this is his history of the world.
yeah, it's 40
So this
volumes.
is history of Al-Tabari, general introduction from the creation to the flood.
No, I'm saying
And
it's
there
40
are 40
volumes.
volumes. There's 40 volumes of
Yeah.
this, right? There's 40 volumes. So this is really extensively covers the supposed life of Muhammad. And yeah, so you can see. So this is really supposed to be very valuable. But when you quote from it, Muslims will tell you it's weak hadith.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anything. And it's funny because I actually wrote a song that they threw him under the bus, which is basically a song about how when you debate a Muslims, man, they'll throw their scholars, Ibn Kathir, the two Jalas, Al Tabri. I mean, they'll throw the Quran under the bus. They'll throw Muhammad. They'll throw Allah under the bus
Yeah.
if they don't like what it says. But yeah, uh, the history of creation is kind of very interesting because when you read it, it's completely different than the Quran, right? Um, Another good book that I would suggest, and you can get it free. It's called The Prophet of Doom. It's about 1,000 pages. It is very well sourced. It'll take from Tabari, it'll take from the Hadith, it'll take from the Sirah, and it'll give you all the sources. So the creation of Adam was kind of really funny, but that's for another day. But all these sources are kind of funny. Okay, the role of the Sahaba, right? Historical accounts. The spread of Islam claims that Islam's rapid spread after Muhammad's death confirms his historical significance. Not really. Archaeological evidence. Some argue that archaeological findings support the existence of Muhammad in early Islam. I have yet to see any. Have you seen any? Because I haven't.
No, I
I
have
mean,
seen none.
especially
Although
archaeological.
I will note, I will
Yeah.
note that there is, I used to, maybe I should do it now. Hang on. Let me do this. Uh, because there is one person in the Christian apologetics community that claims that Muhammad was a real individual, an actual specific individual, I believe. That's the theory. And they wanted to debate J. Smith on the idea that Muhammad did not exist, that Muhammad was a composite. They wanted to say, no, he was a real guy. Here's the evidence. Here's the history. And that would be Too Many Marys who makes that claim.
Oh my God! Yes, I know Too Many Marys. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
agree with a lot of her stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like I
So
said,
at one point, I should have kept the name, but I'll just go back to being too few Lloyds
yeah.
because there are too many
I
Marys.
mean, could there have been a Muhammad? Absolutely, as Jay says, but it would not be the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative because
Right.
he would have come from up north.
In
Now,
fact, Muhammad was one of many such prophets at the time.
yeah. So, and but I thought she did a show with Reason. I forgot what his name. Oh, Reason
Answers,
Answers
reasoned answers. Yeah.
on the lack of evidence for Mecca. I'm not sure if she was trying to say that Mecca existed or that it didn't exist. Because sometimes, I mean, I don't know where she's coming from, but and
Yeah,
I haven't
Space
seen.
Potato says Mary's hell bent on the sin, and that's unusual. I find that
Yeah,
strange. I just find that Space Potato. If you can just add more commentary, just what are your thoughts on that way, what you know about it, because I do find it very unusual. It's
yeah.
it's just strange. So if you know more, if anyone knows more about this, just add your thoughts in the chat. That'll be very useful, very interesting to read.
But you know what? You almost can't blame her because you and I know that even scholars, like you were pointing out, they have all the dots and all the dots point to this conclusion, but then they tell you something totally different than what the evidence shows.
Well, they don't want to lose their $2 million a year
Yeah,
Qatari
yeah,
scholarship or get stabbed in the parking lot, right? To have their papers
yeah.
stapled to
I
their chest
mean, yeah,
with the sharp object.
yeah. So I mean, you could almost understand, but yeah, I mean, yeah, Mary. I know Mary for years. Yeah, she's a little, you know, she's got her own ideas, but and some of her sources, I don't know. All right, so yeah, the Islamic traditions. Now, a lot of the stuff that we know about Islam and even the Muslims all comes from oral tradition, which oral tradition, I'm not completely dismissing it, but without the actual writings to back it up, we're playing the memory game. And we know memory is, it's not infallible. Memory gets influenced, biases get thrown in there. What you remembered 10 years ago, you might remember different now. So you can't completely rely on, you know, oral memorization. And that's like a famous argument that Muslims make. Oh, we have 200 million Muslims who've memorized the Quran. Which Quran? I can show you at least 30 different Qurans in Arabic, not translations, but in Arabic that don't agree with each other. I can show you none of your the so-called Quranic manuscripts that Muslims have found to date. They don't
Right.
match the 1924 Hafs version. And who's Hafs? Hafs was not even Hafs as far as
Well,
the Qirats didn't come until about the 12th century.
let me
And he's
show,
not
since you're raising this point, this is the history of the Quran. Now, here is the mythical but unknown, never seen before Muhammadan Quran right on top, right? Then there are hundreds of variants. So you've got the Amri Codex, Masudi Codex, Uthmani Codex, Kabi Codex, Shari Codex, others and others, right? There are dozens here.
yeah.
Then from Uthman, you have the Madani version, the Medinan, the Meccan version, Damashqi, Basri, Fustati, Kufi, and San'ani, right? Then he's got versions. Kufi version, right? Madani, you've got Nafi, and Nafi has Warsh, and Warsh has variants, and Kalun has variants. Then you've got the Meccan version, Al-Bazi and Kunbul with their own variants. You have Damashqi with Ibn Amr with their own variants. Now, for instance, let's go to the modern Quran. That's the Fustati version. No, my bad. The Kufan version. And one of the versions of the Quran is the Asim. So
Mm-hmm.
from Uthman, you go to Kufa. That's in Iraq, by the way, not in Mecca, not in Medina, not even in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq. Then you get to Asim, and from Asim you come to Hafs. Hafs himself has 4 versions of his own manuscript. 4 versions of his own manuscript. And here's the thing: you have the Kiraat. There was 7, then there were 10, then there were 14. These are 14 canonical versions of the same thing, which have differences. They have genuine differences. Then, on top of that, every one of the canonical versions, these Kiraat, have 2 transmitters, and these transmitters do not agree. Now, Hafs is a transmitter. He's not even a canonical version. He's not even a Kiraat. He's a Rawaya. He is a transmitter, and he's got 4 versions. And so they picked Hafs out of all of these dozens of variants. They picked Hafs. Hafs has 4 versions, and in 1924, then in 1925, they standardized this Quran. They redid it in 25, and then you had the 1936 Cairo edition, and then the Saudis made their own edition in 1985. This is
Yeah.
the story.
Yeah. And if you look at the backdrop of Hafs, he's not even accepted. If his name is in a hadith, the hadith automatically gets downgraded because he was a liar, he was a thief, right? But hey, we'll ignore all of that. He was a great memorizer of the Quran.
He was, but he was terrible with hadiths. He gets
Yeah,
a 0 minus on hadiths, but he gets
yeah,
100 plus on the
yeah,
Quran.
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
And the other thing, it's actually it actually ends up being you got 10. I call them the teachers or readers, right? Because you had the 7, and then the 7 had the 2 students, so that was 14. But then later on, I think it was in the 14th, 15th century, 3 more were added plus 6 students. So a
Yeah.
total of 30, and none of these match the Hafs.
Yep.
I mean, they say different things, and I love when Muslims try to tell me, "Oh, you don't understand, bro. It's a dialect. No, it's an accent. It's a pronunciation.
No.
No, it's not."
I've These are different words, different grammar, missing sentences,
Yeah,
missing paragraphs, missing chapters for that matter.
yeah. I mean, I've got sources that say that they didn't. The scholars don't even agree or didn't agree on how many verses were in the Quran. Right,
Yeah.
and El Sayudi, he talks about 6,616. Well, that's not what we have today. And then it gets worse when you look into the Shiite sources. One of the
Right.
scholars, Kafi, says Muhammad was given 17,000 verses.
Yeah, and the only
That,
6,000 left. So
that's
where's the
about
other
11.
11,000?
That's about 11,000 missing. So they must have had a herd of goats that went through and ate all of that. So depending
It,
on the source, I mean, it's crazy.
those goats had reason to be hungry, right?
I know, man.
Uh, the comment by Space Potato, your thoughts, just a brief diversion again to this, because Petra from National Geographic, now, I mean, you can question National Geographic, I guess, but the whole idea of Alat Manat and Al Uzza, I believe that is established to be an object of worship in deities of worship in Petra, in that region. So I think polytheism, or the worship of these gods, these pagan gods, is, I believe, established in the area of Petra. So
Okay, so okay, well, yes. So that's what it's almost what I believe Dr. Ahmed Jalal was saying, that
no,
by by the 6th century there was no, you know, they were invoking Allah or a god, which god, he was not certain, but he said as far as all the idol worshiping in the Arabia Deserta, no. And I guess by that time, even in Petra also, because Petra or Arabia Petraea by that time would have probably um, pagan worshiping would have been already over with. But we do know that area, because you had a lot of heretical Christians fleeing from the Roman Empire,
right,
going into those areas. So we
yeah.
know there were a lot of heretics there, and Jews, because also they would have been fleeing from the Romans. But yeah, it's more and more stuff is going to be coming out, so that's good. So
Right. Right.
we'll have to see. But I think at the end of the day, in the next 5 to 10 years, with everything that keeps coming out almost on a weekly basis, man, it's like Jay Smith almost every other week, or Mel, or Saint Murad, or somebody, or somebody is finding something, or a book is being written and released, like the latest one from Shoemaker, that I don't see how Islam can actually survive.
Yeah.
But,
I'm not sure what Syntos is referring to. So, Syntos, can you clarify? I'm not sure.
can you post a link to the history of the Quran? What is he talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, go on. Yeah, let's.
Yeah, so on this one, it's a little bit different. I don't have, 15 arguments and then refutations. Basically, I just went straight to the uh, the counters with sources. So what was the first one? Right. So we have one of the problems that we have, or I should say, scholars have, is that we have lack of contemporary, uh, records. Oh, okay, yeah. So the first 15 was just basically the standard Islamic narrative. So this would be the counters, and then we'll come with the Muslim counters, because this is actually a pretty big chapter. So one of the arguments could be that there's lack of contemporary records, meaning if we go back to the 7th and 8th century, we should be able to find enough evidence to either confirm the standard Islamic narrative or to dismiss it. So scholars are pointing out absence of contemporary records from Muhammad's time, such as inscriptions or documents, and this questions the whole, detailed account that they tell you about it. And this comes from Patricia Crone, definitely the book that got her into some serious trouble, The Making Trade and the Rise of Early Islam, 1987. Now, there's also problems with the chronological discrepancies, and these are discrepancies in the order of events related to Muhammad's life. And you can find that in the book called The First Dynasty of Islam, the Umayyad Caliphate, which I believe nobody knew the term caliphate until the Umayyads, right? So we don't have any writings of a caliph called Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, or Ali.
Yeah, I think that's because they ended up starting to read Plato, and they read Plato's Republic, or the Politeia, and he speaks about how to create the perfect country. Well, the perfect society, and you can't, if you only have a little town, you can't have a perfect society because everything around it is corrupted. You have to control everything and then impose that particular law and ethics on everyone. And that's, I believe, where this idea of the caliphate came from. It's based on their use of Greek history, Greek philosophy blended with their own weirdness.
Yeah, because if we read the rock inscription for Muawi, it's in Greek.
Yeah.
It has the cross, which is another reason why these German scholars believe that these guys were some form of Christianity, because if Muawi was a Muslim, right? Oh, and if he wasn't a Christian, why do we find an inscription that starts off with a cross, and he is called the leader, or the Al-Mumayyin, right? Doesn't call him the leader of the Muslims. He's the leader of the believer. I mean, believers is kind of vague. What does that mean, believers?
Mm.
Right? We know when somebody says Muslim, we know, okay, he's a Muslim. He believes in Islam. He believes in Allah. But to say, the leader of the believers, I don't have a clue what that means. And why would they put it? Why would they be associating a cross with a guy that wasn't a Christian? Then we have the problem with historiographical issues. Issues with the historiographical methods used by early Muslim historians are highlighted. You find that in Popkin's The History of Skepticism. Another problem is the late compilation of hadiths. Apparently, the hadiths, somebody took a break for about 200 years before they even started to compile. And this is the problem. the compilation of the information of this empire, this guy, this book, this religion. Nobody did anything for at least 200 years, right? So we know the Hadith literature, at least the six canonized Sunni collection are from guys that lived in the 8th, and one guy lived in the early, I'm sorry, the 9th century, and one guy lived in the early 10th century, 900 and something. And this is from a book, Jonathan Brown, The Canonization of Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Now, Jonathan Brown...
I wouldn't believe anything Jonathan Brown says.
Huh?
I wouldn't believe a word that man says.
Yeah. Oh, I know. He's a Muslim convert, and a lot of the stuff he says. But in his book, he does shed some, some questions about the hadiths. So I got to give him credit for at least being honest in that particular book. Again, one of the big problems is that we have an absence of non-Muslim sources. Again, everything that we know about Islam, everything that we know about the Quran, Muhammad, comes from Muslims hundreds of years later, right? So we have limited mention of Muhammad, one of the most famous, if not the most famous guy. I mean, he got ranked number 1 by, what's his name? Some guy named Hart. I don't think Hart even knows anything about Muhammad or what his criteria was. So we don't have, if Islam was established in the 7th century, and these guys started conquering all these lands, surely the people that were conquered and wrote about these individuals or this group would have said, hey, we just got invaded by this group of people called Muslims, and they have a religion called Islam, and they have a book called Quran that came from a guy named Muhammad. We don't have any of that. That's in the Donner's book, Inconsistencies in Early Muslim Texts. Muslim scholars can't even agree on certain things, right? I mean, just look at the hadiths. I found a collection in Sahih Muslim that I don't even know when Muhammad died. Did he die at 60, 63, or 65? So even the hadiths, which were supposed to be rigorously, scrutinized, to be authenticated, and here I am, the second most trusted hadith collection, they don't even know when Muhammad died. That, to me, is problematic, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's the idea of idolatry and the emergence of Islam from polemic
Yeah,
to...
I'm busy working on that one right now.
Okay, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And guys, a lot of these books you can find archive.org, especially the older ones.
I mean, you don't have to laboriously go through every single line and every single fact. I mean, you can pick ones that are really relevant, that showcase what the arguments are. I mean, it's good to see that you have the evidence, but also, how would you use these? How do you apply these to the situations that you're dealing with when you are debating?
Well, this particular one, this would be great if somebody was debating the historicity of Islam, or, for instance, Mecca, because I have a section on Mecca, or a section on the Quran, because remember, Muslims tell us the Quran is the verbatim speech of Allah. It's perfect, has never been changed, right? There was one scholar that said not a dot has been changed, and I started laughing because I would challenge any Muslim to show me an early manuscript that has a dot in it. So if the dots were added later, and if the vowels were added later, those are human inventions. That means humans have the opportunity to change the Quran. Okay, historical context of the Quran. The Quran's content may reflect later developments rather than early Islamic history. Again, this points to a development over a period of 200 years. Okay. Now, here's a mistake, and I just noticed it. The source is wrong. It is not Patricia Crone. The Hidden Origins of Islam is by Karl-Heinz Oleg, unless she's got another book. This is what I mean. You have to double check and triple check, because am I silent on the stream? Hold on a second. Can you hear me? Hello, testing. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, 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 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Oh. He must have dropped because, yeah, it's kind of weird. Hey, Space Potato, like that name. Okay. Today has not been a good day. We've been having problems. Space Potato, it's Jane. Aha! What's up, Jane? How's it going? So, Jane, have you been liking my what do you call it? My songs? Okay. I guess I'll continue. How long has the thing been going on? For 77 minutes. He usually likes to keep it under 2. All right, I'm going to keep going on. Hold on a second. Lloyd is sending me something on the. Okay, he's going to try to connect back up. So, all right, I'm just going to go with the flow. Okay, let me go back to the screen here. All right, so we left off historical context. Okay, archaeological evidence, meaning there's limited, if any, archaeological evidence supporting the early Islamic narrative. And the most important one, I would say, is if we can't show that Mecca existed in the 7th or prior century, okay, so he can't re-enter the studio. This is not good. Huh. Yeah, I've never had that problems when I used StreamYard. I could always get knocked out and come back in. So, guys, Lloyd is saying that he has been cut off. He's going to end the stream.